He kicked her out that night, in the dead of winter, when her screams of labor echoed through the marble halls of the mansion they had built together. Amelia clutched her swollen belly, begging her husband Daniel to let her stay until the child was born. But his eyes, once filled with warmth, now burned with the cruel flame of greed and lust. Standing beside him was Cassandra, the mistress with painted lips and a smile dripping with venom. "This is no longer your home," Daniel said coldly, his hand possessively resting on Cassandra's waist. "Go back to your father's house. That's if he even still cares about you." Amelia staggered into the stormy night, her breath shallow, her heart splintered. The chauffeur, who had once been her friend, pitied her but dared not disobey Daniel's orders. He dropped her near the gates of a small clinic outside the city. With nothing but sheer will, she pushed through the pain, collapsing into the arms of a kind-hearted nurse who took her in. Hours later, under flickering lights, Amelia brought a baby boy into the world. His cry pierced the night, fragile yet defiant, a sound that carried the strength she no longer felt in herself. Daniel, meanwhile, celebrated his newfound freedom with Cassandra. He signed papers transferring properties into her name, convinced that Amelia had left with nothing. But there was one truth Daniel had never cared to learn. Amelia's late father had quietly secured her future, tying her inheritance to the moment she bore a child within marriage. That night, with her son's birth certificate signed and witnessed, Amelia became the heir to a staggering $20 million fortune. Weeks passed. Daniel paraded Cassandra through society circles. Their photographs splashed across tabloids. But beneath his arrogance simmered financial desperation. His businesses, reckless and poorly managed, bled money. Creditors began to whisper. Investors began to vanish. And the lavish life he clung to slowly began to rot at the edges. Amelia, in contrast, recovered with quiet strength. She named her son Gabriel, after the angel who announces hope. With her inheritance, she didn't flaunt riches. Instead, she invested wisely, building schools and clinics, ensuring others would never suffer the abandonment she had faced. The whispers of her kindness spread like wildfire, and her name returned to high society. Not as Daniel's discarded wife, but as a woman reborn in resilience. Daniel caught sight of her one evening at a charity gala. She wore a gown of emerald silk that shimmered under the chandeliers, her face radiant not with jewels, but with a calm dignity that money could never buy. At her side stood Gabriel, in the arms of a trusted caretaker, the child's eyes mirroring Amelia's strength. Daniel's breath caught. He hadn't expected her to return, let alone thrive. He approached with Cassandra trailing behind, her smile faltering as she saw Amelia welcomed warmly by business leaders, philanthropists, even politicians. "Amelia," Daniel stammered, attempting charm. "You look remarkable." "I—" But Amelia's gaze was steady, cool as marble. "Save your words, Daniel. The night you turned your back on me was the night you buried whatever respect you once had." Cassandra, desperate to hold her ground, sneered. "Don't be so proud. You think anyone cares about your little charity projects? Daniel has built empires while you—" A gentleman nearby interrupted, his voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Correction. Daniel's empires are crumbling. If not for Cassandra's desperate clinging, he'd already be bankrupt. Meanwhile, Amelia has funded 6 schools in less than a year." The room rippled with murmurs. Daniel's jaw tightened. Amelia, unshaken, simply turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the ruins of his pride. But Daniel's fall was far from over. The weeks that followed the gala gnawed at him like termites feasting on rotting wood. He would sit in his office, the curtains drawn tight, staring at documents smeared with red ink. Every account he opened screamed the same thing: debt, collapse, ruin. Cassandra, once so eager to curl against him with whispered promises, now paced the penthouse with restless agitation. "You said you had everything under control," she hissed one morning, her eyes sharp as daggers. "But every call is another demand for money. The bank is threatening foreclosure. I didn't sign up to live like this, Daniel." He slammed his glass against the table, the amber liquid spilling over the edges. "Do you think I planned for this? I gave you everything, Cassandra, everything Amelia should have had. But now it's slipping away. Her laughter was cold, without a shred of sympathy. Maybe Amelia was the real prize all along. You threw her out like trash, and now she's the one sitting on millions while you're scrambling for crumbs. The truth of her words struck him harder than the whiskey burning his throat. He remembered Amelia's face that night in the storm, pale and streaked with tears, her body bent with labor pains. He had chosen vanity over loyalty, lust over love. And now, the woman he cast aside had risen higher than he ever imagined, her name spoken with reverence while it carried the stench of scandal. But pride is a cruel master. Daniel refused to bow. Instead, he sought ways to crawl back into Amelia's orbit, hoping to feed off her success like a starving leech. He began showing up at her charity events, offering forced smiles to the same people who now viewed him with disdain. Amelia never acknowledged him. Her gaze always passed over him as if he were smoke dissolving into air. Still he lingered, and in his lingering, he discovered that Amelia's fortune had not only restored her, but multiplied her power. She had partnered with business moguls, expanding her father's legacy into education, healthcare, and real estate. The city had begun to see her as a leader, a woman of influence who rebuilt with grace instead of vengeance. The more Daniel watched, the more his desperation swelled. Gabriel, now a bright-eyed toddler, was the centerpiece of Amelia's life. Daniel's blood boiled each time he saw the boy in her arms. Knowing the child bore his name, his lineage, yet he had no part in shaping his future. One evening, drunk and furious, he shouted at Cassandra, "That boy is my son. Do you hear me? Mine. Amelia is poisoning him against me." Cassandra smirked, twirling her diamond earring. "Perhaps you should have thought of that before you kicked her out into the street. She owes you nothing. And if you think Amelia will ever let you near that child, you're more of a fool than I thought." Her contempt dug deep. Daniel's pride twisted into obsession. He began sending Amelia messages, first pleading, then demanding. He wrote of fatherly rights, of the marriage they had once shared, of the son he claimed was being stolen from him. Amelia never replied. Her silence drove him mad. One stormy evening, he stationed himself outside her estate, watching as lights glowed warmly through tall windows. He saw her silhouette pass by, Gabriel's laughter echoing faintly into the night. For the first time in years, guilt crept through the cracks of his rage. He had chosen Cassandra's deceitful beauty over the loyalty of a woman who had once loved him unconditionally. He had chosen fleeting passion over family, power over tenderness, and lost everything. Yet greed choked whatever redemption flickered in him. His thoughts returned again and again to Amelia's inheritance. $20 million and more now, given her thriving ventures. If he could worm his way back into her life, if he could claim even a fraction of that wealth, he might salvage his collapsing empire. He tried to charm the public with sudden philanthropy, donating paltry sums to causes Amelia championed. The media saw through it quickly, mocking his attempts as shallow imitations of her generosity. Cassandra grew restless, her patience thinning with each humiliation. One night, after a bitter argument, she packed her things and left without a backward glance. Daniel was alone, his empire reduced to dust, his mistress gone, his reputation shredded. Only Amelia remained, a shining beacon he could neither touch nor extinguish. And so his obsession deepened into something darker. He began following her, disguised under caps and coats, lingering at her events, watching her from across crowded rooms. He memorized her routines, the way she carried Gabriel to the car in the mornings, the parks they visited, the schools she toured. He convinced himself it was paternal instinct, a father longing for his child. But in truth, it was hunger. Hunger for a fortune, hunger for redemption, hunger for a power that had slipped forever out of his grasp. Amelia, though, was not blind. She noticed the shadows at the edges of her life. She saw the car idling too long at the corner, the same figure blending into crowds. She recognized the scent of desperation that lingered in places Daniel thought he had hidden. Yet she said nothing. She carried on, head held high, refusing to let his ghost disturb the peace she had built. One night, at a prestigious awards ceremony where Amelia was honored for her contributions to the city, Daniel could no longer restrain himself. As she walked on the stage in a gown that shimmered like liquid gold, Gabriel clapping joyfully from the front row. Daniel rose from the crowd. His voice cracked through the applause. "She is my wife," he shouted, staggering forward. "That boy, Gabriel, he's my son. I have a right to him, a right to her fortune." The room gasped, the glittering air turning heavy with scandal. Security rushed toward him, but Amelia raised a hand, her expression calm, almost pitying. She stepped to the microphone, her voice steady as she addressed not just Daniel, but the entire crowd. "Yes, once I was his wife. And yes, Gabriel carries his blood. But let me tell you what else he carries. The night I was cast out into a storm while in labor, the memory of betrayal that almost destroyed me. That child is not Daniel's possession. He is my son, a symbol of strength born from pain. And as for my fortune," she paused, her eyes flashing, "it is not an inheritance I hoard, but a legacy I use to build futures, not to destroy them." The crowd erupted in applause, drowning Daniel's protests. He was dragged out, his shouts echoing uselessly against the marble halls. Outside, the reporters swarmed, their cameras flashing as they captured the image of a man unraveling in public. His humiliation was complete, but still he clung to his obsession like a drowning man to driftwood. Amelia returned to her seat, Gabriel nestling into her lap, his small hand curling around her fingers. She kissed his forehead, her gaze distant yet unwavering. She knew Daniel's story with her was not over. Not yet. For men like him, ruin was never final. They lingered like shadows, waiting for another chance to strike, blind to the fact that the light would always expose them. And in the quiet chambers of her heart, Amelia prepared for what she sensed was coming. For though she had triumphed tonight, Daniel's hunger had not been extinguished. It had only been starved, and starved hunger was the most dangerous of all. The night Daniel was dragged out of that award ceremony marked the beginning of his ultimate downfall, though at the time he still believed he could claw his way back into Amelia's life. Stripped of wealth, power, and the mistress who once fed his vanity, he was left with nothing but the bitter taste of disgrace. Yet, even in ruin, he clung stubbornly to the thought that Amelia's fortune and Gabriel were his last lifelines. The city, however, had seen the truth laid bare under the chandeliers of that hall. No one would lend him a hand anymore. No one would trust a man who could discard his wife in labor for fleeting lust. Daniel drifted from office to office, begging former allies for loans, for meetings, for second chances. Doors slammed in his face. His name, once golden, was now spoken with ridicule. Cassandra had long disappeared into the arms of another wealthy man, leaving Daniel haunted by her mocking laughter. His penthouse was seized, his cars repossessed. He was forced to retreat into a cramped apartment in a forgotten part of the city, where broken neon signs flickered through cracked blinds. Amelia, meanwhile, rose ever higher. The scandal of the gala had only made her legend greater, for people had seen with their own eyes the dignity with which she stood against her ex-husband's chaos. Her charities multiplied, her business ventures thrived, and Gabriel grew into a child beloved by all who met him. His laughter seemed to heal the wounds of those who heard it, and Amelia often thought of him as the angel her father's inheritance had prophesied, her salvation wrapped in tiny hands. But Daniel's obsession did not die. He began writing letters, long, desperate letters begging Amelia to forgive him, promising he had changed. When she did not respond, his words grew darker, more demanding, filled with the delusions of a man who still believed everything was his by right. Amelia kept them all locked away, for she had learned that ignoring him was the only way to starve the madness. Yet she never underestimated the danger he carried. The breaking point came one rain-soaked evening when Daniel, gone and unshaven, forced his way past the gates of Amelia's estate. Security subdued him quickly, but not before his wild eyes locked on Gabriel playing in the garden. "That boy is mine," he screamed, his voice cracking to the thunder. "He's my blood. You can't keep him from me." Amelia stepped outside, shielded by guards, her presence calm yet commanding. For a moment, their eyes met across the storm. She no longer saw the man she had once loved. She saw only a shell consumed by greed, envy, and desperation. "You lost your son the night you cast us away," she said, her voice carrying through the rain. "And you will never have him back, not while I breathe. Daniel was dragged away, his cries echoing long after he was gone. The court soon followed. Amelia, with the full force of her influence, petitioned to strip him of any parental rights. The evidence of his instability, his financial ruin, and his public outbursts painted the picture of a man unfit for fatherhood. When the ruling came, granting Amelia sole custody and legally severing Daniel's ties, the city celebrated. Headlines read not of scandal but of triumph, of a woman who had risen above betrayal to protect her son and her legacy. But Daniel did not vanish quietly. Broken and humiliated, he wandered the shadows of the city, a ghost among men. Once, he had been a master of towers that touched the sky. Now he was a nameless figure hunched in the alleys, muttering to himself of fortunes lost and empires stolen. People who recognized him would sometimes stop, pity flickering in their eyes. But most turned away. They remembered the man who had kicked his wife into the storm, and they decided his fate was nothing more than justice. Amelia, however, refused to let hatred consume her. She had suffered too much to carry the poison of vengeance. She focused instead on Gabriel and on the future she was building. She expanded her father's inheritance into a foundation that stretched beyond the city, across countries, bringing education to villages and medicine to towns forgotten by progress. Her name became synonymous not with tragedy but with hope. Years passed. Gabriel grew into a young man, tall and bright, his mother's resilience flowing in his veins. One evening, curious about the father he barely remembered, he asked Amelia, "Why did he do it, Mother? Why did he throw us away?" Amelia paused, her hands resting on the papers of another school project she was funding. She looked into her son's eyes and saw the innocence still lingering there, the longing to understand. Because, she said softly, he was blinded by what he thought mattered: money, power, beauty. He couldn't see the treasure he already had. And when a man cannot see love, he loses everything. Gabriel nodded, absorbing her words with quiet thought. "Then I will never be like him," he said with firm resolve. Amelia smiled, brushing a hand over his hair. "That is why you are my greatest victory." The years turned Daniel into little more than a cautionary tale whispered among business circles. His name became a warning, his story a parable of greed and arrogance. Amelia, on the other hand, was honored with awards, invited to speak on grand stages, celebrated not for the money she inherited, but for the way she transformed it into life for others. Her journey from betrayal to triumph became a story told to young women as a beacon of strength, a reminder that even in the darkest storms, dignity can light the way. And yet, fate has a way of weaving its threads into unexpected patterns. One winter morning, Amelia received word from a small shelter on the outskirts of the city. A man had been found collapsed at their door, weak and starving. His ID revealed his name, Daniel. The news struck her not with joy, nor with anger, but with a strange, quiet sorrow. She visited the shelter that evening. In a dim room, under the harsh glow of a single bulb, lay the man who had once been her husband. His hair was streaked with gray, his skin drawn tight over bones. His eyes, when they opened, were hollow but still carried the flicker of recognition. "Amelia," he whispered, his voice no louder than the rustle of leaves. She stood over him, composed, her heart steady. "Daniel," he tried to smile, but it came out broken. I thought I could take everything. But in the end, I lost it all." Amelia said nothing for a long moment. Then she leaned closer, her voice gentle yet unyielding. "You didn't lose it all, Daniel. You threw it away. There's a difference." A tear slipped from his eye, the last remnant of a pride that had finally shattered. "Gabriel, does he know?" Amelia shook her head. "He knows enough. He knows the kind of man he doesn't want to become." Daniel's lips trembled, but no words came. For the first time, he looked truly defeated. Not angry, not scheming, but simply empty. Amelia turned to leave, her figure framed by the doorway. She did not offer forgiveness, for some betrayals carve wounds too deep, but she left him with dignity, the same dignity he had once stripped from her. Days later, news came quietly that Daniel had passed away in his sleep, with no fortune, no empire, and no legacy but the ashes of his choices. The world hardly noticed. His name faded into silence, remembered only in contrast to the brilliance of the woman who had survived him.